This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
Welcome back into the program. So great to have you along for the ride. As always, really happy to have my next guest here on the program. Is excited to have him on. He's my congressman from right here in the 4th Congressional District in the great state of Kansas. Happy to have on Congressman Ron Estes. Congressman, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Andy. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it's always great to chat with you, especially with how busy you guys have been. And I'm sure that you got to enjoy a lot of popcorn during the show from the State of the Union on Thursday night, because I didn't expect him to yell the entire time. So, I mean, I listen to heavy metal music, and I like a lot of yelling in my music, but that was just a little obnoxious, I think.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, this is the most partisan State of the Union that I've ever seen since the time I've been in Congress, or even before that as well. And it was kind of it really was just coming across it was a campaign rally that he was trying to convince the Democrat base that he's the candidate that they should be cheering around. And it didn't matter whether he said stuff that was true or said stuff that wasn't true. That was all part of the campaign stick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Talk about what you expected. I know you wrote an op-ed piece beforehand about what Joe Biden should mention in the State of the Union compared to what he actually said, because it sounds like right out of the gate he tried to reference World War II and the threats to democracy across the world, and then, of course, said that anybody associated with Donald Trump is part of that threat to democracy as well. I mean, it didn't start off on a very uniting message like normally we would try at least to appear to be during a State of the Union address.
Yeah, I mean, you think the whole purpose of the State of the Union is to talk about what's going on in the country, and instead he focused on what I think is going to be their campaign pitch. Is instead of standing on his record that Biden's accomplished or failed at accomplishing over the last 3 years, he's trying to attack and denigrate President Trump and anybody that might vote for President Trump, and that's not what we should be doing, and it's certainly not reflective of the real true State of the Union. When you look at Bidenomics that he brags about, is just the pain and suffering that people are having when they go to the grocery store and go fill up their car with gas, and seeing the open border and just thousands of people. I mean, in the month of December, there were almost as many as the population of Wichita. Over 320,000 people crossed the border illegally.
Yeah.
And that's what I op-ed before the State of the Union. What I said was, I don't know what the president's going to say, but what I hope he says is we need to have good physical security in our country, and he's going to reverse the policy decisions that he made to end the Trump policies that were working and create this open border in this unsafe environment. And that, as president, he needs to be responsible to step up and make sure we could have physical security in the country. And also, I said the second thing that I hope he really talks about is financial security, is that, we have $34.5 trillion debt and no end in sight, and his budgets have overspent what is coming on tax revenue, and that, starting the next day, he's going to have all of his committee or all of his cabinet agencies to go focus on bringing forth a 10-year plan to balance the budget and to make sure that we can pay down the debt and not bankrupt the country going forward.
Yeah, well, he definitely didn't address any of that stuff during the State of the Union, because it was all about, everything that I heard was everything's in shambles, which is odd because he's been the president of the United States for the past 3 years. So you would think that we would talk about the benefits and good things that are happening, but he talked about how bad things were, and the only way to solve them would be a bigger project and more spending and more investments, quote unquote, into these departments and agencies, when he touched on not only Ukraine and Israel, but then he talked about education. He talked about climate initiatives. All it was let's just create a new department, a new agency, a new program, and spend a lot more money. And all of a sudden, poof, these issues would go away. And that's what he's done the past 3 years. And obviously it hasn't worked.
Yeah. I mean, he's just gearing up for his election rhetoric and promising people all this money in order to get their vote. And it's a sad state of things when we've gotten to this fiscal state of the country that we're in because of all the issues that he does. And, the student loan, it's not a student loan forgiveness, a student loan transfer from the people that took the loans to everybody else, the taxpayers that expected to pay him back. So after the Supreme Court told him he couldn't do that, then he tried to figure out a way to do an end run around them. And it's just one thing after another that he's trying to break and trying to throw so much money at getting reelected.
Yeah, no, it is unfortunate. We're talking with Congressman Estes from here in the 4th Congressional District of the great state of Kansas. Let's talk about, for a minute, let's talk about the budget and some of the appropriations. I know you guys have been working on the appropriation bills. You're set to vote on, 6 out of the 12 appropriation bills over the next week. We've seen the continuing resolutions just to go through weeks at a time trying to keep this going. How optimistic are you that we could pass some of these? Obviously, it's not going to fulfill the entire federal budget, but the fact that we're actually voting on an appropriations bill is the first time that we've seen us get this far into the game since like the Barack Obama era. So at least we're making some ground. What does that actually look like on your end?
Yeah, it really has been a lot of bad habits that have come into play here, and we're fighting against this muscle memory of bad habits that instead of funding the government on the starting date of October 1st for each fiscal year, create a continuing resolution because you can't decide how much you want to spend on everybody's pet projects, and then having a massive bloated omnibus spending bill that you have to pass before Christmas in order not to shut the government down. So Speaker Johnson's broken that, started to break that cycle, and we've broken appropriations down. Instead of all 12 bills coming due at one time, we've split them into 2. And this past week, we passed the first 6 of them. And so we have appropriations bills out there. It's not the way the process should be done. They're not perfect bills and perfect amounts of spending. And now we've got to pivot to the next 6 and focus on them. And actually, it's going to be a little bit more difficult with these next 6 because it's the things that are most important. It's Department of Defense. It's Homeland Security, all of the things that my colleagues in the Democrat Party don't want to address and don't want to admit that that's the responsibility of the country, and instead they want to spend a whole lot more on Department of Labor and Department of Health and Human Services, and so those are going to be arguments that have to be worked through.
Yeah, that is going to be a challenge for sure. Now, the appropriation bills that you guys originally worked on before the holidays, November, December last year, and the details that came out about them showed some decent cuts, some consolidation of projects, ending the Waters of the U.S. rule in some of these. It seemed like that they were on the right track. How much different are they now compared to what you guys were working on at the end of 2023 before the holidays? Are they relatively similar, or have they been manipulated by the Democrat-run Senate that didn't like a lot of that you guys were doing?
Well, the bills that we passed out of the House, we passed 7 of the 12 bills out of the House before September 30th.
Yeah,
and and there were some noticeable reductions in spending there, and it was basically we were on target to meet what was done with the debt ceiling that was passed back in May. Was that we'd have a cut and limit on increase in spending, and so we were focusing on getting that done. Obviously, the Republicans in the House are trying to punch above their weight in terms of getting their things passed, but we're only 1/3 of the government, and got the White House working against us and the Senate working against us, and so the final bills that came out weren't nearly as fiscally responsible as the ones that we passed out of the House.
Sure.
Overall, there were some cuts in some programs, and a few programs there were some increases. Overall, there was a little bit of cut. It just wasn't nearly as much as what we've done in the House.
Yeah. Well, at least we're working slightly in the right direction, which is good news. There's a bigger issue, though, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this because you had another op-ed coming out of the Fox News talking about federal debt and how bad that is, but also talking about personal debt. We've talked a lot about that on the program as well because we can complain about the government spending out of control all they want to, but, Congressman, we just saw the numbers about how credit card debt is working out to be one of the largest household income debts that we see across the nation. Student loans, obviously, being a major issue. People aren't downsizing or cutting back on their lifestyle with inflation up still near 20-30% compared to the past 3 years under the Biden administration. We're just spending more to try to compensate for that, and it's not doing us any good. How important is it to actually focus on, our own personal budget while we complain about the federal government spending out of control?
It really is important, and the issue is, and I say this over and over again, is inflation is such a scourge, and it's a scourge particularly to middle income and lower income folks, because they have less discretionary spending or money that they have available to pay for the needs that you have, whether it's food, whether it's rent, whether it's gas for your car. Wealthier individuals can handle inflation a little bit better, but the number one goal ought to be to keep inflation down so that we don't have this ongoing tax. And the Biden administration went completely the opposite direction, and they threw out all this spending plans and started spending so much money in his first 2 years in office. And now we've been reaping the consequences of that since then. And if you look at where inflation is, since President Biden came into office in January of 21, the actual cost of living has gone up over 18%. So basically you're paying 18% more for the same goods, for the same carton of eggs, for the same, gallon of gas, the same rent. On average, it's 18%. And so what people are getting strained by is they're having to use their credit cards to actually buy groceries and to focus on the day-to-day things. And that's going to set the stage for, some terrible consequences when you have to pay next month's credit card bill and also buy groceries for that.
That is Congressman Ron Estes from the 4th Congressional District from the state of Kansas. We'll continue that conversation with him coming up right around the corner. Got to take a break right here on the Voice of Reason. One segment left. Don't go anywhere. Stay here.
This is the Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.
Yes, it is. Welcome back into it. We continue our conversation with Congressman Ron Estes from the 4th District of Kansas. Eventually, you're not going to be able to get out of this thing, and they don't care. They just say, well, look at that. And they use it, like we saw in the fourth quarter, they use it and say, well, look, that Americans are spending more money, that there's no recession going on, or we're not anywhere near a depression. We're not doing any of that because look at that, the American people are spending money, but it's spending money on debt that's going to come back to bite them, and the bubble's going to burst at some point. And we're going into, Congressman, the summer season right now where gas is going to start going up. We're going to start going on trips again, and the normal summer cycle is going to happen to where we're not going to be able to control this bubble that I think is going to burst, before the election. They can't contain this any longer.
Yeah, it's been remarkable to see that the Americans have been able to sustain this for so long that they have been, and basically they've run down all their savings. I mean, part of it was savings were built up with a lot of the COVID stimulus money that was thrown out, but now almost all of that's gone, and people are paid through all their savings. They don't have enough money for an emergency. To be able to offset that if they have an illness or have a car breakdown or something that they need money for, and it's going to have some devastating consequences on a lot of Americans.
Yeah, it really is. Got a couple of minutes left here with Congressman Ron Estes, the 4th District of the great state of Kansas. Being on the Ways and Means Committee, obviously you have a hands-on ability to work on some of the budgetary stuff, the appropriation bills like we've talked about. But where are we at with the push to try and fund Ukraine and Israel right now? That conversation kind of dropped off a little bit after the immigration bill that failed in the Senate just a few weeks ago, where they tried to partner it with that. When the immigration bill fell, then they tried to push Ukraine and Israel funding standalone on its own in the Senate. That obviously didn't go anywhere, and Speaker Mike Johnson said that would be dead on arrival if it made it to the House as well. So are there still conversations, and how close are they of ramming that through with some of the appropriations you guys are working on right now?
Well, I think there's conversations, and I think we need to be having conversations about what we do as a world leader, but what Speaker Johnson's driving, and I'm supportive of him in this process, is that let's talk about protecting Ukraine's borders. Let's talk about protecting Israel's borders, but let's also talk about protecting the United States' borders. Yeah. And that's the piece that President Biden doesn't want to own up to. He doesn't want to face that. So we're having a difficult time getting through to the Democrats in the Senate and the White House that we can look at the role of America as a leader, but we also need to make sure that we protect and defend our country as well in that process. And so it's for some reason they just don't want to. They don't want to admit that. They don't want to engage in that conversation. And until we address border security, it's hard to say that we should go protect borders in other countries.
Well, no, and it's wild, Congressman. We saw it during the State of the Union, was that while even, Marjorie Taylor Greene, while, people can say whether that was called for or not during the calling out during that conversation and yelling at Joe Biden about the incidences that have happened here, that Joe Biden has blamed Republicans for not passing a bill. I'm sorry, Congressman. I thought that he's brought in over 10 million people for the past three years in his administration, and we find out that he's flying people into the country in the sums of near 300,000 as well. They're already here. What bill could we have passed to have stopped what happened here just a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is the president does not need any new laws in order to protect the border. President Trump did it with the current laws. It's President Biden who made the choice to go out and issue these 60, 70, 80, 90, depends on which number of executive orders you want to include in the mix. That's actually sent the signal around the world that you should send people here. Yeah. And we're seeing gang members coming in. We're seeing Chinese nationalists. We're seeing people from countries all over the world, not just Mexico and South America. But they've been given the signal by the president's administration that they get a free rein to come here. And it's if he would just reverse all of his executive orders using the existing laws, we could protect the border.
Yeah. What a concept. There it is. Congressman Ron Estes from the 4th Congressional District, my home district here in the great state of Kansas.